Yeah, thanks so much for hosting us, Diana. It's of course really great to have this book launch in the auction house, because auction houses have been like affected, shaken by this new market, but also very much driving it. When we think of the Christie's auction of the people, which like probably for many of us was the moment when we understood there's something happening that we have to get our heads around. Thanks Wagner Verlag for organizing this and for agreeing to do this book within, I think, 24 hours. It's like drop culture, quick launches are now also arriving at the book market due to the force of NFTs. Thanks so much for that. And especially my gratefulness to the Design for joining this talk. Usually with a book launch, you know, you have someone asking questions, and the person who wrote the book has some knowledge to share. Today I have to take care not too much to fall back into my usual role of the art critic interviewing the artist, because Simon's practice is one that I have researched also in course of writing the book and trying to understand what's happening. And we actually both have kind of like a similarity that we discovered, that we are trying to bridge two worlds, two art worlds, as you say, two audiences, as I would say, two markets maybe. Yeah, Simon, I don't know if I have to introduce his work. I was like ultimately hooked at the Venice Biennale in 2015 when Simon did the New Zealand pavilion with an installation of a server architecture inside the Biblioteca Nazionale. So one of the first huge like server spaces of history where all the Marco Polo sourced knowledge was actually gathered. Under the frescoes of Tintoretto and Tizian, Simon assembled objects that were designed by the former chief designer of the NSA and were taken from the graphics of the leaked foils of the NSA that Edward Snowden had actually published. Right. And then at the airport, at the baggage transport belts, the Tizian and Tintoretto paintings were reproduced running around on the belts. So that's the scope of Simon's practice, like mirroring dispositives into each other, showing continuities in history, and not stopping to talk about circulation in the present, but linking it back to circulation of knowledge and goods in the 14th, 15th, 16th century also. Yeah, and in recent projects that were super impressive, of course, involved also crypto. And I stood usually in front of these objects at the Buchholz gallery, and Danny Buchholz was saying, something in there is now mining money, and I was not really understanding what that means. If I would have been more alert, I would have maybe seen a 2018 show in Schinkel Pavilion called Proof of Work, which is the protocol how like blockchain transactions are actually working. The fantastic thing was also there, like to take this, to take the idea of the blockchain and to mirror it with the idea of curating. So responsibility of selection and curating was like given over, distributed, right? Like one person chose the next curator, chose the next curator, chose the next curator. Recently in Hamburg, Simon co-curated the show Proof of Stake. The two proofs will be maybe also a topic tonight, which was a model, like an exemplary model of curatorial care, of giving artists space to really have like a close look at their work, and not overscribing it with too much content, like what I'm doing now, but also opening up questions like how blockchain and claims, property claims, and how like distributed control connects to all the dispositives, like you connected it to the Ethnological Museum with the help of the work of Timo Sikin. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Also, sorry, one last thing. Sure. Simon's a professor in Hamburg at the HFPK, where everybody's super excited that they first got a star, but second they also got a super engaged professor who is really taking care of his students, investing a lot of time, which he also does in the Berlin Artist Program that he co-founded with Wolfgang Tillmans, Willem de Rooij, and Angela Bullock, providing space and time for young artists.
What a lovely introduction. Thank you, Kolja. And thank you, everybody here, for hosting me, also Grisebach, and thanks for tolerating my language limitations. But tonight is really about also looking into the amazing book that Kolja's produced, I guess, yeah, a little bit of being already explained about what Kolja does, but I think for me as an artist, I've engaged with him when he was at the FZ, also when he was at Exploit magazine. He's a writer and a critic who is always, and a curator who is always in close dialogue with artists. And I think this book comes from that position, and is something that I want to, I think, highlight, because I think what Kolja and I both care about is bringing, I think, exciting artworks that are happening in different contexts into dialogue with newer audiences. So I've been following art and artists-made works with crypto and with cryptocurrencies and NFTs for some time. Kolja has also started to be very involved with that recently, and I think bridging audiences between people that care about art, like institutions like this, also presumably the audience sitting here, and new people who are just coming to art, who are very excited about art, who are even have resources to support artist projects. It's two slightly different art worlds, which I think is really interesting. And I think Kolja's book is a very, very good introduction for an audience who knows a lot about art, cares a lot about art making, but is coming to crypto as coming to cryptocurrencies and these new networks. So I commend you on that, Kolja, and I think that's where maybe we should start, is also talking a little bit about what's in the book, unpacking a couple of those things. So I'm gonna go through, maybe introduce a couple of key questions, which I think the book raises, and maybe you can say things to that, and then we can kind of back and forth on it. So I guess one of the key questions, I think, is what is value based on in the crypto space? Where is the value coming from? Right. Yeah. And this is both in terms of, I guess, the money that predates the art, let's say, but also this new value which is forming around artworks and distribution of artworks. So, do you want to start speaking to what your book unearthed about that context?
Yeah, I mean, that's the core question that was actually driving the book, because these auction results, like how a Beagle video that for me was invisible before, because I wasn't part of the 1.3 million followers he has on Twitter and Instagram, going from, I think, 66,666 dollars to 6.6 million in 3 months. Yeah. That was a shift that was not only economical, that was cultural. Right. And at the moment I heard about it, actually it was Britta also in the audience who hinted at me. I was really a late discoverer of NFTs. It was also like in the wind shadow of this GameStop thing, right? When like a online coordinated gang of young, partly impoverished Generation Z people for like 24 hours looked like being able to take the Wall Street down. Started by actually big hedge funds betting against a company they love, GameStop, a gaming company. That also looked like a cultural shift, and that's where I started becoming interested. These like weird values in money, for one thing, of course, are part of a very speculative economy, but they wouldn't exist without another very speculative economy, which is cultural value, which is people gathering around certain values, assets, conversations, and agreeing on the value of things. Right. And then when I got more into it, with the help of Wilhelm, who's also here. Thanks. I understood there seems to be suddenly a solution to a problem that I have been interested. Being an art journalist in Berlin, which is a model place of like cultural value, extracting financial value, destroying cultural value, it seemed like suddenly there was a solution to a really fundamental question. How can you translate cultural value into financial value? How can you actually put in numbers the contribution that some self-exploitedly entertained project-based adds to real estate before it's sold off? In crypto, you have communities that, because they have such interesting conversations, the stakes people hold in them, the tokens they have, actually increases also the value of these tokens. So they do interesting stuff, and they get rich at the same time, which is kind of beautiful. And it might be partly also offer a solution maybe to the severe problems of the art market in the past 15 years.
Okay. Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I think maybe it's worth defining some terms in that case, and maybe like fleshing out a little bit of the environment that we're talking about. So I think there's lots of different ways in which artists use cryptocurrencies, and lots of different ways. I think the most famous way now is by selling JPEGs that are linked to asset, a kind of registry. So for those who are coming again to this conversation to NFTs for the first time, the basic structure of an NFT, like a Beeple, one of the most well-known ones, is that it's some kind of digital file, which is an artwork, which then has a registry in a blockchain, which is basically just an online spreadsheet of transactions, and it holds that value and it tells you who owns it, right? So it's a very simple thing in some ways. What a Beeple type use of a cryptocurrency and crypto for artwork is.
That's an example of your efficiency. You just explained blockchain and NFTs in one sentence.
Yes, it's often, I think, maybe worth saying as well to this audience. It often feels more complicated than it really is. I think everybody who is familiar with an auction house like Grisebach knows about how eccentric things gather value, and they can gather them very quickly and lose them very quickly, and that trading those objects that kind of hold that value, that are kind of a container for that value, also can be an act of care and an act of speculation at the same time. And I think that's something that is really true with NFTs. Like, so you know, in some ways, these digital artworks with an online registry that a bunch of people take care of, it's sort of something you already know from another context. It's not so different.
And it's surprising that you apply the term care. That might be surprising to many in the audience, maybe, because what is seeable from outside, what's viewable, is like huge prices.
Right.
And everybody thinks like speculation. When does the bubble burst?
Right.
So where exactly does the care component come into it?
Well, then maybe that's worth also reflecting back on my projection onto this audience, with the idea that people buy artworks because they both like them and they see financial value in them. And I think that's been true of people that bought my work, right? So they come to an exhibition, they see a nice thing that they think has cultural value, but they also see a price tag and a container for financial value. And they buy that asset so that it holds both that kind of cultural value and that financial value at once. And it's a kind of a nice way to also support the people who make the cultural value. But there's other incentives to put your money there. So it's also a kind of a fundraising tool as well. So yeah, I would say that a lot of NFT buyers come for similar reasons, both for speculation and for cultural value. And I think there's other links as well, right? You keep an artwork like what's on the wall here to show to people that come into your domestic environment, to show them the kinds of things that you're interested in. Like I identify with that painting because it's hanging on my wall, and I want to share it with other people who also might see value in it. And people who buy NFTs do a similar thing, right? They have it in their wallet, which is visible online. And other people can come and see what you've collected, and they can see how much that's worth, but they can also see your kind of personal interest in cultural value, right? So I'm an NFT maker, I'm also an NFT buyer. I have a collection of NFTs. My collection of NFTs is unfortunately more various than my collection of artworks, which I also like to buy. I have a small art collection as well. But what's great with NFT collections is anybody can look at my profile on various different platforms and see which things I've bought.
They don't have to make friends with you, like creeping up at an opening and trying to get your attention, so to be invited to your living room after 12 years.
But there are
social spaces, right? So there's no living rooms anymore.
There's no living rooms, but there are social spaces, I would say. So of course there's websites, but as you all know, having a website doesn't mean people look at it, right? It doesn't mean there's traffic across websites. And what I think is really special also about what's happening and what's happened with collecting NFTs is that there is a discursive environment around it too. So there are various different platforms, Twitter.com being the most visible, I think, where people share their excitement for having bought things. And chats that happen in threads on Twitter are a bit like what happens when you go to an opening and you whisper to your friend at the dinner that you've just bought this or that piece, or that you've seen this or that piece sell at a certain price or whatever. And so I think these social spaces, again, kind of exist in different ways at the same time.
When we talk about the question, now is the tipping point when I become the journalist again. But you were talking about the question how value is created. And
right.
There's a lot I have still not understood about it. Like, why does Kevin Awash sell a super generic, boring digital photo of a red rose hat for $1 million, and nothing being, like, it's just a JPEG that everybody can see. And you crafting a super considerate work about the energy consumption of blockchain mining with a legacy gallery, with Pencil Gallery in New York, at the high point of the NFT market. And it's like taking all the legacy of critical reference art. It's you use mining computers that you bought on eBay. People buy an animation with these computers the moment they buy them, and the thing is minted. The computers are taken off the blockchain again and given to the Oxford University to serve in climate modeling.
Right.
It's like, it's beautiful.
Right.
It's also like a parody of reference art. It's like, it seems, why does this work only gain 5 figures results?
Well, that's, I think, in some ways quite an easy answer. And I think, again, we know this type of behavior from the legacy art world, which is the term which I like to use for the art world that we're maybe speaking in now, is because, these Kevin's activities and his artworks that he's created have a certain audience which and a certain visibility within that particular audience which is caring about and buying those NFTs. It's the same reason why a Christopher Wool or for example, I don't know why I used his name, but is more expensive than another fantastic artwork by a younger artist or a less visible artist who has less visibility. It's because within the group of people that are buying those assets, there's a kind of a social hierarchy and a kind of critical discursive hierarchy which is built up a certain value around those things, and that's true in NFTs as well, right? And maybe this is worth stating at this stage. I think the people that buy art, like what is sold here at Grisebach, and the people that buy NFTs are different people for the most part, and that's true also with my own work. The people who buy my NFTs and the people who buy my sculptures that I show at Buchpräsentation or Pencil are different people, different buyers, and they created their wealth in different places. They value different things, but they both love the culture that's produced in these particular formats because they kind of stand for something that they like. Right,
but like one character seems to buy like not very considerate and short-minded, meaningless JPEGs, and the other audience agrees that Christopher Wool is better. It's not just like the social network; it's better than.
I don't know. I mean, I prefer.
It's better than a young artist's work who still has to do the work to get there.
Right.
So you are just you are now like reducing everything to the social connections, and there's a heavy provocation in that.
Right. Well, I think criteria for quality and value in culture is anyway quite a difficult thing to pin down, because I mean, let's just say there's not only differences within one particular market or one particular group of the great Christopher Wall and the not so well experienced young artists which you represent. But for example, I grew up in a country in New Zealand where there were completely different canons, basically vying for what is a valuable cultural object, right? So I grew up in post-colonial context, if you can say that, in New Zealand. And there were a kind of a white art history that was there, and then there was an indigenous and kind of multicultural also art history kind of at the same time, and they both go to auction and they both sold within this kind of system. But how can you say that, for example, the work of an artist like Michael Patakopai, who was an artist who I knew, who is coming from an indigenous tradition and a kind of British tradition or Western tradition is less important than another artist like Colin McCann, who is more expensive than Michael Patakopai, but his wife and comes from these different value systems. So the reason why I bring that up is because I think putting cultural and financial value together is always a challenge, and to say this is quality and this is not is always a bit of a social game about who's saying what, and who has the power to say what.
No, it's up to the art critics to really argue and describe in detail why one work is better than the other.
Right.
Don't question my legitimation.
No, I mean, I also believe in cultural discourse and value that you create and add, right, by framing these things in this way. I think you do a service to that. But I think ultimately somebody with financial capital has to come along in order for the kind of the wheels of the canon to spin and say, I believe in Kolja Reichert's role as a cultural critic. I trust his judgment, and I'm going to also back that up with this significant financial capital that I'm going to put behind this object, and that's going to help canonize this particular artist's work.
Yeah. I mean, it's not only. I think I don't want to go too deep into my conception of art criticism, but I think the product that we sell as art critics is not only judgments, and it of course cannot be objective criteria, because criteria are always developed by artworks. So what we can do is compare artworks to artworks, right? What we do with that is though something more, like we kind of draft a common ground of reference and put works into a certain narration that we haven't created, but we can describe it, and we have to take care of the language of how we describe this. It's art history. We are like the miners, kind of, right? Like people put artworks into the blockchain of art history, and then art critics aren't really doing this anymore, but in theory, right? It's gallerists, it's other gatekeepers. You put an artwork into the blockchain of human culture, and then people around the world have to legitimize and verify this transaction, and then the artwork is added to the chain, right? It's a little bit similar than like transactions on the blockchain. Anyway, I think narration is the product that we sell, to show how we can be affected by artworks, or what are the stakes that this artist is fighting for. What is the experience that what is the happiness that we can get from art? And narration to me seems like also the core resource of NFTs in a way, right? It seems to be like a super fictional market where fiction and finance marry in a way that we haven't seen before, in an extreme way.
I would say that it feels very much like the other art worlds that I've been part of for a long time as well. Again, I don't know why I'm the voice of continuity here, but I find my experiences in the NFT art world and the legacy art world very similar, but with different people who are interested in slightly different things, and whose sense of value and capital also is changed by their particular circumstances, right? I mean, I think one of the reasons worth making explicit here as well is why NFTs gathered so much capital around them, financial capital around them, is because there was a lot of financial capital to spend with people that had very quickly changed their financial values or their wealth in a short amount of time, because cryptocurrencies themselves had ballooned in value, right? So you don't have an NFT market without the incredible rise in perceived and stated and actual, I guess in some ways, value of Bitcoin and Ether, right? And most of the volume of sales that is done of NFTs is done in Ether and on the Ethereum network. So you also don't have an NFT market without the growing utility and spread of the Ethereum ecosystem as a whole, right? And I guess also it comes parallel to narratives of an evolving web, a different web, which needs a financial asset component to it to function in a different way, right? I think one of the most interesting things that I know about the promises of crypto and NFTs is talking about what people frame as Web3, right? So we subscribe to the idea that the internet has been already through two separate kind of generations, let's say. Web 1, which was basically the 90s up until the dot-com crash in 2001, which was websites, links, and maybe Google is the sort of icon of what grew out of that infrastructure. And then Web 2, which is maybe talking about the social web, so like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, maybe that's a different paradigm and environment. And now people who are interested in crypto and believe in what it promises are talking about Web 3, which will be defined by other platforms, other systems. Presumably Ethereum could be some blueprint for that. And I think the difference between Web 2 and Web 3, the claims that are made around that Web 2 is an environment financially where big companies own all of the real estate, all of the architecture, and all of the behavior on the web. And they're able to use us and our sociality and profit off our interactions, right? And regardless of what those interactions are. So if you and I fight on Twitter, Twitter profits, right? And the claim, the promise of Web 3 or the crypto-enabled web would be that you can own, as a user, a part of some of the value that's created, rather than just the platform owners, rather than just the Facebooks or the Twitters of the world, right? So in a Web 3 world, because we have this way of kind of basically having a share or a piece of the financial puzzle as a part of the infrastructure, the fact that we can trade those and the fact that we can buy those and they have kind of floating currencies to them means that all users can be owners at the same time. So it's not the overlords of these big companies only that get benefits. It's you and I as well. And not only that, but the social benefits that we create by being social, by interacting with each other, that at the moment Twitter, Facebook benefit from financially. No, if we keep a token that carries some of that cultural value that we're creating ourselves, then we can value from that. We get value from that at the same time, right? And NFTs are maybe like a part of that infrastructure, right? And this is like a test case for that environment, right? So as an artist, I create buzz around a JPEG. I create a following around a particular group of JPEGs that tell a particular story. People get excited about that. There's cultural use value in that. But I also get to keep some of the financial value of that behavior around that.
We can also compare it to the art market as we know it, like where there is this like one horror scenario that actually drives a lot of the behavior. If you make an innovation as a gallerist together with an artist, if you invest and you're successful, you have to be super afraid, because like now with the super steep speed at which prices rise, the artist has no other choice than to go to the next gallery to be able to keep up with the demand for exhibitions and production of works, right? The gallerist just can like see his investments going. Then if the work goes to an auction 10 years later, the artist has to see the value like maybe 100-fold, and with him not gaining anything. And there was this study that I also put in the book that Robert Rauschenberg and Jasper Jones would have earned 1,000 times more in their lives if they would have got a cut of 10% from any resale. NFTs do that.
Right.
And this is also like touching on the cultural shift that we are seeing there. That speculation suddenly is something that doesn't take away from people having invested in the beginning, but helps growing what they have created.
Right, and there's maybe two components that is worth teasing out in that great example, I think, is that, you know, the fact that resales and 10% royalties go to artists when NFTs are sold automatically is both a cultural decision, right, which has a cultural history in Sieglau and other conceptual artists who kind of proposed similar structures, but it also has an architectural, a structural, an infrastructure element to it as well, because they're hardwired, hard programmed into it. When I do my resale, nobody has to settle that account, right? It just directly goes to me. And the fact that that's so easy, and the fact that you can't really mess with that when you have the asset, makes it a lot more possible to do this artist resale royalty situation. Because, like, as you know, there's been various people in the legacy art world who have tried to say, okay, every time an artist sells something, then it resells, then it should go back to the artist, but in different jurisdictions, they have different laws, and within those jurisdictions, it's even not always enforceable, the fact that that's happened. And so, you know, what this new infrastructure does is it says, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you buy it all over the world. The minute that it's paid, 10% goes to the artist. Right. You know, so you know, it's also not a social game. It's an infrastructure game. You know?
Yeah. And you have, like, in the system as we know it, like, success creates tension. And I feel like in the crypto world, success creates joy, in a way. I mean, it also can create, like, disappointment, because if you're not part of it, if you don't have the money to spend, if you can't keep up, then you're not part of it. And you see the ship leaving, and you might even conceive people possibly developing languages, games, cultures on their own, that all people left behind will not even understand anymore.
But maybe something, that's another thing you touched on that I think is also mentioned in the book a little bit as well, and one of the key claims of the NFT art world is transparency, right? You can see who bought what and who sold what, when, to whom, for how much, right? And that's like massively different than this environment, because you know, there's some degree of visibility on what sells for what. But as we all know, who work in this industry for some time, there's many ways to obscure that information as well, right? Some of it is very public and others are very private. Maybe an auction house environment is one of the more public, actually, versions of that. But certainly in primary sales and galleries, if I have an exhibition and somebody asks me, you know, did you sell out and how much for? I can basically lie, and it sort of doesn't, you know, it's very easy to obscure that. When you sell an artwork on a blockchain and you've listed it or whatever, everybody knows exactly how many you sold and for how much. And I think that plays into the social dynamic environment of people feeling good and bad about various different things, and about how much financial value speaks to approval also, in a different way, in a more amplified way.
Right. We will talk more, but we want to make sure that we are all, like, kind of at the same understanding of things. So we thought we might invite to also ask questions in between. Does anybody want to add something, or change the direction of the talk, or ask something for understanding? Otherwise we just go on.
Yeah, exactly, because I think also it's one of those things where it can seem like there's a lot to know in order to have an opinion. But what I'm trying to say is that I think what we both want to do is make that bridge between specialized knowledge from this world to this new emergent world, and say that there is actually, there's no question too stupid, there's no whatever angle that shouldn't be touched on. And yeah, we of course want to be useful to you guys in the audience. So if there are things that would like explanation or direction, please ask. Yeah. Yes, we have two. We have first team. So yeah.
Let me just ask you: why do you think there is a different, how can I say, group of collectors for NFTs versus what you call legacy artwork? Why do you think I mean, I've talked to both of the groups.
Yeah.
And funny enough, what I noticed that a lot of people actually were not interested in art in the first place, but started to collect NFT art.
Yeah.
So why do you think is that happening? There must be something that's opening them up for getting interested into it.
Great question. I think something that is on a lot of people's minds, right? I think that it's two separate art worlds because it's two separate pools of wealth and social spaces. I think is the easy basic answer, right? I think, and if I can do a sort of caricature of a crypto buyer, an NFT buyer first, they might be somebody that has started working in building Web3 and starting to be involved with a company around crypto, and maybe they get paid in tokens, and maybe they suddenly go from a situation of 1 year being worth 100,000 and the next year being worth 10 million, and then they start thinking about what they can do with that 10 million, right? And then they look around at what you do with assets. Often when people have excess capital, they look out to branch out in terms of where those assets sit, not only because they want to diverge their holdings into different spaces, but also because they might want to support culture that they see emerging around things that they care about. And maybe because they've been building companies in this space, and maybe because they believe in some of the promises of Bitcoin and Ethereum, they want to support culture that is also literate in that same environment. So they get very excited by an NFT that is using the medium of smart contracts. They get excited about things that work in the language of crypto. And they want to support that culturally and diverge in terms of financial assets. So I think that could be one environment, and that I think that caricature would not describe your everyday art buyer. You know, they've probably made their money somewhere else. They probably also believe in art as some, indication of other types of values that they also believe in. I mean, I can be both of these people, by the way. So I'm not, I wouldn't want to make claims about who's more interesting or more legitimate or anything like this. But you know, why I want to have and put my money into an Isagenskin is a different thing than why I want to put my money into Mitchell Chan. You know, and these are two very well-known names in two very different art worlds. Does that somewhat answer your question?
Kind of, yeah.
So,
you're producing NFTs and legacy artwork.
Yes.
Yeah. What is the question for? Is it the quality? Is it the same, or producing it? So, if I like work of Simon Denny, should I buy both?
Yes. Yes. No, but let's take this. It's a good question. It's a good question because it hints at something else, I think, right? Like, because like it's saying like, okay, I'm literate in this particular type of artwork, and presumably that same brain is being applied to a different medium, right? That same creative impulse is being applied to a different medium, and I think that's the right way to see it also, because blockchain-enabled art, NFTs, is a new medium. And there are new things you can do with it that you couldn't do with a painting or a sculpture or an installation or even a performance, right? It creates new possibilities. And I think artists that really engage in those new possibilities are creating things that could not exist in another environment. And I can speak about my own work, for example, and Kolja brought up my Venice Pavilion, right? I did a piece where I enlarged and contextualized cartoon graphics of an NSA illustrator and kind of put them in dialogue with history, right? That's one thing I did. And now, recently, I made a piece with NFTs called .com Seance, which did a similar thing, but with a different environment. So I collaborated with one of the first, most successful illustrators that was made an NFT, who made an amazing project called CryptoKitties. And CryptoKitties was one of the big first use cases for Ethereum as well. It was not only an early NFT, but it was the biggest thing on the Ethereum network at the time. So an artwork was the most important thing in Web3 at the time.
Again,
where you could buy a cat, a drawing of a cat And those cats, if you bought 2 of them, you could breed them together and they would produce another asset, which was a mix of the cats, right? So that's a CryptoKitty.
It's beautiful. It's media specific. It doesn't do anything that the blockchain can't do itself.
Right.
But it's also quality.
It's like
well, I mean, so
the cave painting. The quality maybe shows if the social dynamics or triggers.
Yeah, as a network experience. Yeah.
I don't know.
As a networked experience, I think it's really interesting exploration of how things can move around and change, right? But I mean, I bought a couple CryptoKitties at the time. I thought it was an interesting phenomenon. But I also met the guy who drew the cat behind it, right? And I said, oh, this is a really interesting artist. In the same way that the guy that did the NSA drawings for me was an interesting artist, right? And I said, oh, I want to collaborate with you. So I did a collaboration recently with that same artist, Gile Twardowski, for those who want to look up the name of the artist. And we worked on reimagining logos of dead dot-com companies that crashed in 2001. And he and I produced a series of redesigns of those logos, and we sold them as assets, as groups of assets. So you could buy a pets.com logo, for example. For those of you who know the history of the web, pets.com was one of the most spectacular crashes in 2001. Gile redesigned a logo for that, and you could buy that. And I claimed that that you're resuscitating old companies. And with that, you also could register a domain name. So I have on my website, and Grisebach has on their website, grisebach.com, I assume. I have simondenny.net. But with crypto wallets, instead of a long string of numbers, you can also have simondenny.eth. So if you know, instead of finding my wallet address, you can send me money to simondenny.eth to my name. And I bought up all of the company-named wallet addresses as well. And so pets.com.eth became also a way to resuscitate that company. And people who bought those logos started then performing with those addresses. They started making projects based on those old company models. And then also there's a network of people around the world who speak about the history of those companies and kind of talk about the development of the web. And that couldn't happen in a legacy show. It couldn't happen in the same environment.
Right. You could do the same physically and show it at the gallery.
Yeah, but it wouldn't have 400 assets in it, and it wouldn't have 180 holders of those assets, and they wouldn't be able to trade with each other and see also the money kind of flowing through that network, right? I think the network is a network that is brought together through the medium, right? And you also don't have a domain name that you can keep. You don't have a registry that you can keep. You can't see who bought it and who sold it. You can't see what they changed their domain names to, etc. So there's a whole other environment. I mean, maybe there's other examples of other works by other artists who also use it as smart contracts as a medium. But just to say, since I'm sitting here, that is one thing that can only be done in that environment. And I think the right history to link it to is a history of conceptual art, right? Like also like ephemeral things that then get an asset container for them and then are sold as a certificate, you know. And I mentioned Mitchell Chan before. He's an artist who did a kind of an Ethereum version of the Eve's Client piece, for example, that I'm sure all of you are familiar with, this ephemeral piece, I can't remember the name of it, where he basically sold the stand-in for an artwork, and you bought a certificate that you either burned or you didn't. And that was like that's something that has been translated into this history, I think. So ephemeral things like digital images, ephemeral things like software, basic software, you can now sell that in the same way that you sell an idea, and it has a whole different life.
And the question of like content and form and medium and technique completely like slipping around, right? Like I would object if you say like NFTs are a medium. I think the medium is digital data that they are saved in, right?
When the financialized network is part of the medium.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of like now listening to you, I'm also like becoming ready to admit that. But it's interesting because it's really like quantity tilting into quality, right? It's the first time in history where transactions or like bookkeeping technology because that's what NFTs are, right? Like one tool inside the bookkeeping, decentralized bookkeeping technology of blockchain, is generating a medium. Is the network the medium? Like,
yeah, some would say speculation is the medium even. Ria Myers, who's an artwork, who is an artist who has been making NFT-based, contract-based work for a long time, for example, just recently tweeted that speculation is the medium. And I think that's a very interesting provocation. I don't think it's supposed to be taken totally literally, but I do think the financialized environment is a part of what creates the conditions for making the work and for consuming the work.
For me, last year was probably the same as for many of you. Like we looked at this NFT thing as something like, okay, if I compare these images to the images I know on my wall or the galleries I like or in the museum, they look bad. So NFTs are bad, and culture is going down because people are losing taste. Yeah. Then if you look at it, and if you look at these projects, you understand the images are not the.
It's not the whole package.
The purchase, right? It's not the whole package. It's maybe just the cover artwork. Like if you buy an album and you have a picture on top.
Right.
So what you buy is not really what you buy. You don't buy like so much the picture itself. You buy the conflict. Right. You buy a social relation. You buy membership in a network. Right. But you also in a way buy that you buy, right? Like I don't know if you would agree, but as I suggested in the book, spending 69 million on a JPEG is not really surprising, because you buy a really unique thing. You buy the moment where a person buys a JPEG for 69 million, right? And you being that person, right? So you create a cultural moment, right, with your money,
and maybe that's cheap then.
Yeah, I think it turned out really expensive because the buyers tried to spread the stakes in the people collection they had put up, right? Yeah. And the token went down from $17 to 70 cents, which is also interesting because you also took part in a building of a collection that tried to bridge legacy art, as you call it, with NFT art. And it seems like these models of like, hey people, you can have like passive stakes in something that just grows in value by itself, that doesn't seem to be a very attractive offer, right? What people want to do is having like an active position and being part of a scene that creates the cultural and the financial value together, right? So like being a passive stakeholder in the people collection of someone else, super boring.
I think it remains to be seen. I think it's also very early, but I think both of those models are correct. Is it worth opening up to the audience again and asking if there's a prompt or a question? Yes, hello.
Yeah, the main thing is you really buy visibility as a collector, though this is really something new. So for normally if you're a collector, you're discreet, you're invisible. So except some of those persons here in the audience, but normally the collector remains invisible. And so this is different in NFT because it's forever, it's visible. So you just buy credibility. This is the attraction. Yeah? And so this fits perfectly well to those decades of art has to be Instagrammable. So this is really the fit, and this is the new stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, I think you're right to some degree, but if I can also push back a little bit and saying that I think art is always about, or as I understand it, it's always a little bit about showing somebody that you're interested in something, and that to some people that you think are important should know that you did that thing, you know. And maybe it's only one person if you buy a painting and you're a secret person or whatever. But I think there are also, of course, legacy art buyers, for want of a better word, who buy for visibility, like NFTs, right? Like you know, whatever the more visible collections of the world and even of the city. Buy to show that they bought those things, right? And they even open private museums to do the same thing, or put things, donate things to public museums and also put their name beside it. So I think the adjacency of who buys and holds what cultural asset has always been a part of buying, and maybe now with NFTs it's more visible. But again, you get this difference of visibility, transparency, and attention, which is, I think, something new with the internet in general, right? We all know that we can publish whatever the hell we want on whatever web page we want, but it doesn't mean that anybody's looking. Right, and so I think transparency and visibility and attention are in a kind of dynamic world in this environment, and so it's very visible that the person who spent 69 million at Christie's on that particular NFT is visible. You buy visibility in that sense with that purchase, but I guarantee pretty much nobody knows what's in my collection in my NFT wallet in this room, right? And that doesn't mean it's not available and visible. It just means that nobody cares. So I think there's different dynamics at play that come with different technical and social environments, but I wouldn't say that it's so different that reputation and association is not connected.
Yeah, but in former time it was only an option and was hard to get, and nowadays it's part of the game. Yeah. So you just can't escape from it.
Well, again, it's not a yes and no, right? So I think yes, you can, and there are lots of people that try to obscure their who they are, and there's a lot of pseudonymity in the crypto world, both in just buying and selling bitcoins, but also in collecting NFTs. So there are pseudonymous collections, there are pseudonymous collectors. I've been to very funny dinners where people wear masks because they don't want to reveal who they are as a buyer or a collector, but they do want to meet me. Yeah, as an artist, which I think is an interesting new dynamic that I've never met before. Yeah. I mean, I wear a different kind of mask, right? But yeah. So I think in some ways yes, in other ways I think there are new ways to also obscure identity if you want to. And as we know, cryptocurrencies and cryptography in general is about a balance between privacy and you need cryptography for privacy in a digital environment. And transparency. So you know exactly which address sent what amount to what thing, but you don't necessarily know who the person who is that owns that address. Right? Yes, maybe one there, and then one back to you. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I just speak out what many people probably think here, but I think that collecting art is only reduced to speculation and making money and showing off what you have. There's nothing to do with art for me, and it's the end of art in a way. Like the whole art market is already running to the end of art, but it's not about content and quality of the artist. It's only about speculation, and this is so decadent. I think that
sorry, Anna, could you repeat her question?
Yes, of course. Okay, so I'm going to repeat the question as I understand it, and maybe you can correct me if I get it wrong. So the question is NFTs in this type of art buying environment not only about speculation? It looks like it's only about speculation and not about caring about quality and value and culture. That's sort of the question.
It was less not so much a question than like a statement.
Like an observation,
We just talk here also only about speculation, how much you can raise money, how people can show off what they have, which the art market does anyway, also the conservative art market. But at least if a collector also has like some love for the art world and might, as you said at the beginning, also wants to make money, it's okay, but if it's only about speculation, this discussion is only about speculation, then it has nothing to do with art. Even more, I think it's the end of art.
Okay. I don't think I can repeat the whole question, but I think the essence of what I repeated already is the essence of the statement. The claim being put forward here is that this type of new art market environment is only about speculation and not about caring about culture and values. And that also, even the second part of that claim is that this conversation has only been about speculation and value. And I would push back on both counts there. I know NFT collectors, and I am one myself, they care a great deal about the culture that this is representing. They care the same amount about that type of art production in a different environment, in a different moment, with a different technical context, as I do about the legacy artworks that I collect and care about and behave in. So we can talk about projects that I find inspiring for their conceptual depth, for their cultural complexity, for their aesthetic value. We can do that.
Sure. Yeah. Just a short remark. because it appears to me that you've been talking about old models of ownership in a new realm, and about artworks that catch high prices, if it be NFTs or Christopher Wool's. But I think the blockchain technologies offer new models of ownership.
Sure.
And maybe it would be like you started to speak about in the beginning. Maybe it would be good to, for instance, explain what a DAO is, for instance.
Absolutely, yeah. We should talk about
as an alternative model of ownership and a utopia, as opposed to a dystopia in disguise. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Again, I want to push back on the idea that all we've been talking about is financial value. I just don't think that's the case. But
I also think we haven't. But it's easy to get the impression.
No,
to maybe make ourselves like more clear why it was not only about speculation. We should have some examples.
Sure.
Projects that we think are interesting. Do you want to start?
Sure, but maybe.
And this is not about like defending the whole.
No,
like,
no.
I don't have hardly as many stakes in this culture as Simon has. Like I'm the outsider here, so it's not about like stage against audience, right?
Can I just add one? I didn't mean that the conversation was only in this, but you described very well that you see the new technologies as a continuation of, for instance, conceptual art and digital art as your very interesting practice. But as opposed to that continuation, the disruptive moment doesn't seem to be the technical things. It seems to be the value that is arbitrarily given to things that art world people think are useless and worthless. And this is a value debate that provokes so much reaction at the time being, right? Like these CryptoPunk images, they look like screensavers, and all these value debates. So the disruptive moment seems to be here. And I think there's another disruptive moment which lies in that utopian aspect. And yes, and maybe this kind of comments would be, you know, would be, you know, answered by.
Sure.
It's like kind of part two of what we wanted to do, right? We had two questions for tonight. One, how is value being created? And the other question, what can be built?
Exactly.
So let's gather some examples.
Totally.
What you can build.
And just to double down on that again, like I'm an artist who makes legacy artworks and also works in community building and stuff like that, and education. But I also curate, and I've curated a number of exhibitions which point to, I think, projects that are in the crypto space that are also really interesting in terms of cultural value, aesthetics, and technology all coming together, and including new possibilities for ownership. So, for example, let me talk about one project which I think is really amazing, which is an older project actually called Terra Zero. It's a collective group of artists which has changed a bit over the time. But it's essentially using smart contracts on top of automated contracts to propose the idea of a forest, an industrial forest, owning itself. Right. So industrial forests produce value by growing and cutting down trees and then selling them. Terra Zero as a project proposes an idea where somebody wouldn't own the forest, but the forest would own itself. And this can exist in this new technical environment because these contracts can be automated, and so the value can be kept in wallets, which are legally assigned to the kind of forest, and then things can be bought and sold on top of that. They can employ people to do the work of tending the forests, but then the legal entity gets to kind of like grow because of that. That's one really interesting crypto art project, which doesn't look like an NFT, but has NFT aspects to it as well. Another amazing, explicitly NFT.
Let's do that back and forth.
Oh, yeah, you go. Yeah, you go.
I would like to mention a new project dropped by, not yet dropped, but minted by a Congolese group of artists that the Dutch artist Mäzenatentums is working with for a lot of years. He has like mirrored the value production with the long tail of exploitation it's based on, like the production of discourse and critique. On a plantation, a former Unilever palm oil plantation in Congo, there's an art center now, there's a museum by OMA. They are selling chocolate sculptures about the dark sides of colonial history, and that enables them to buy back land and reintroduce circular foresting and food security for entire plantation workers. There was a sculpture being, I want to say, carved in 1931 during the Pender uprising, and it contained the evil spirit of a Belgian colonial agent who was accused of rape. And it turned up in a museum in Richmond, Virginia. And long story short, they would not lend the sculpture to that OMA-built museum on a former plantation in Congo. So what they did was minting the sculpture, and now they hold the NFT of that sculpture, being represented by the turning X-ray photos that the museum provides on its website. The museum claimed that it's like very unprofessional and illegal, which is funny because they don't even properly answer like lending requests. And the artists now are ready to sell these 300 parts of that NFT, and then with the returns they will buy that land. So it kind of like also relates to Terra Zero because it's about connecting that new bookkeeping technology with actual effect in the physical world, right? And it's kind of beautiful also because it's also about, like, it has all these contradictions, like anybody can claim anything and sell it as an NFT, right? As long as nobody else has the stakes. We have also lawyers in the room. So please contradict. So this is the first case where actually restitution questions are tackled with NFTs. So, okay, the museum owns it technically, but let's just own it also and spread the ownership and distribute it.
Yeah, that's another great example, I think, of how the medium can be used also by different communities and ways of owning can kind of come in different ways. I think another artist worth mentioning here is an artist called Sarah Friend, who is also a programmer. So she does both, she went to art school and does painting, but she also does programming. And she programmed a very special NFT called Lifeforms, which is a kind of, anyway, has a kind of beautiful interface with it, where there's a color-based glow as the NFT cover, let's say, the visual identifier of the work. But the work itself is about the way that the NFT behaves. And a Lifeform is free to mint, so you can start one anytime you like. But it will die, quote unquote. It will cease to exist if it stays in one wallet for over 3 months, right? So within 3 months, you have to transfer it to another wallet, or else it will cease to exist. And so this is a kind of behavioral design where you have to kind of create a network and move this artwork around in order for it to exist, in order for it to last. So that's another really interesting, simple idea that uses the technology for something that is not possible to do outside of that environment.
I felt like the most interesting drops in 2021 were rather than by musicians than by visual artists. One being a MITSCHNITT selling 555 images that were not claiming artistic value, but were highlighting this like rupture in meaning and other things by being random combinations of 3 Cadaver XT style face features each. So it's like a very ruptured representation of a face sourced from 3 sources. And on the back side, you could even turn them around, like a memory card was something of a MITSCHNITT's back catalog, a sound file. And then there was a collective instrument where all the buyers could meet and make music together. And talk in a specific Discord channel. Is it like properly represented? Wilhelm Maller, one of the...
I guess the main idea of that was that it's a co-owned open source library of music, so technically the owners of these NFTs own the whole collection together, and are free to use it in any way they want, either in their own music or yeah, it's a community effort to unlock this collection for everyone, not only the owners, but actually anyone to use.
Thanks. Yeah, that's an important collection.
Yeah,
and maybe that's a nice reflection back on what Saskia brought up, and also the question at the back is like how different people can interact differently and care about cultural production while also using this new environment, right? So it was a bit harder to have a collective ownership of different parts of music before this technology made that possible. It was also hard to imagine an infrastructure underpinning the ownership of a forest or the critical reflection on the ownership of a cultural asset and sculpture from across the different cultures and a complicated history. And these are new aesthetic and technical objects that make that possible. It's also maybe worth mentioning a DAO, because it was brought up before, and it's a technology, it's a term that gets thrown around a lot. It's a decentralized autonomous organization, which is a buzzword basically for a kind of digitally formed kind of corporate ownership, corporation in a way. The basics of a DAO are a treasury, so a fund of some kind, or a collectively owned bunch of assets or money, and a bunch of different wallet addresses that can allow something to change about that. So when a decision is made, for example, of spending some of that treasury on buying an artwork, let's say, all of these wallets that I've mentioned in it have to kind of sign off on it, and that's technically designed. There are also somewhere to discuss things is often part of the DAO structure, so a chat forum or something like that, and there are questions around the structure of how decisions are made, so governance structures are part of that too. But it's essentially like a corporate ownership, and corporate, I don't mean corporate as in business, I mean corporate as in a group of people coming together and having shared ownership over a particular set of assets. And that can happen across borders, you can set it up immediately, it can happen across different regulatory environments. That's still being figured out legally, but it exists before it's fitting into those different legacy structures.
There was one state in the US, though, Wisconsin, who actually acknowledged DAOs as a legal form. Wyoming, yeah. Being equal to NGOs and GmbH as limited.
Yeah, exactly. The limited companies. Yeah. But also, there are DAOs that exist, these types of things, that already are creating collections. So they're almost like institutions, museums in a way, because a group of people who have access to their funds then decide, often in dialogue with its members, but also kind of curators that are part of it, sort of like a board of which NFT projects to acquire and bring together as a kind of collection. And if you want to look into some of those, one of the, I think, more successful, interesting, critical ones is called Fingerprints DAO. And Fingerprints DAO has a really interesting collection of conceptual artworks on, that are made from different NFT projects. And yeah, there are many more than just Fingerprints, but that's maybe a good place to start.
And to open the imagination, one of the most radical or like far-thinking DAOs is City DAO, which walked around in Wyoming and is now planning a city through this global anonymous negotiation structure. It will have public land, it will have private land, and it will probably fail, but it's a beautiful kind of utopian project, right? So I still think one could make the claim that we still only talk about speculation. The reason for that being that we are talking about a new bookkeeping technology, and it's very recent blending with art production and art circulation, right? And we are not probably talking about the question, is the art being traded there, or the experiences or organizations being developed there better than painting? It's rather...
Why would it need to be better than painting? It's something else. You know? I don't think painting's ever going to die, but I do think this new networked environment is a really interesting space for culture to do things as well.
Questions?
Yeah. Yes, yes.
Yes, since you were mentioning the music, I was actually quite interested in what kind of role music is playing in the NFT world. Doesn't matter which genre, just in general, I did not quite get the playing together thing you were mentioning.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious about the music part.
Sure. So there's lots of different models for, again, we're going to speak about infrastructure because that's actually the precursor to what's possible to make an art, right? So I'm going to talk about business models, but it doesn't mean that I don't care about culture, right? It's because I think that you need resources to produce culture, and different resource environments create different possibilities for different types of cultural projects. And so one of the problems with being a musician right now is that, again, it's similar to this other previous dynamic that I mentioned with Facebook as its kind of icon, that platforms like Apple and Spotify gather all the financial value from playing music at the moment. It's I think, a well-known situation where you know, we stream our music collections, whatever they are, and the artist gets paid a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of something per stream, right? And that means that not a lot of funding goes towards the artist. And I think that the promise and the hope of the Web3 version of what that might look like, the crypto internet version of what that might look like, would be something like the project that Villa was involved in, that Kolja mentioned for Amnesia Scanner, which was an experiment in different ways that you can pay for and interact with music in its production phase. In that a group of buyers bought for quite a high price, so hundreds of dollars, a unique piece of music by that artist. And there were sort of 5 or something, 600 of those pieces of music. And then you could come together with other people that have bought part of that music, and you could make tracks based on it or something like that. But you also owned that piece of that music, and you were the only owner of that piece of music. So everybody could hear it and listen to it, but you were the owner of that particular little fragment. That's really interesting because it was a way to generate quite a lot of money for the artist in that initial distribution. But also the buyer presumably has something that might be worth something in the future. And again, that's not just to say because all we care about is financial assets, but that is a way to generate revenue and generate ownership models that enables artists to do different things that right now it's really hard to generate finance to support, and also ownership is rather limited in the way that you can interact with music. So that's one quite good example, I think. There are other examples.
Plus maybe?
Exactly.
Who sold a digital clone of her voice. So it's an instrument she put together with her partner Matt Dryhurst, that on the basis of machine learning models her voice. And so her voice can be layered like a texture over any kind of audio file. People can propose to the DAO that this voice was sold to music pieces, and the DAO can have a vote on the question if that piece should be produced with the Holly Plus voice. If it's produced and it will be printed as an NFT, 50% goes to the artist who made the entry, 10% I think stays with Holly Werden, and 40% goes to the DAO, which is an interesting way of distributing.
Right.
States, right.
So it's collective ownership, it's creating a collaborative environment, and it's also creating a way to fund those activities, all in one kind of gesture. Maybe I want to ask now if we've maybe been going for long enough in this discussion, or is it time to wrap it up, or is it time for
maybe the last question?
Our last question.
Maybe there are actually several players.
Yes, sir.
Do you see any ways how the legacy art world and the artworks of like sculptures and paintings can be connected or can use the NFT market or this new technology?
Yeah. I mean, my favorite version of that is that artists who are curious design new projects for the new environment. I think that's the most successful thing. So people who are conceptual artists, let's say, or people who do, performance projects or whatever, things that find it difficult to have a place to make an asset, try a new environment, to make a new piece, engage with a new medium, let's say. That's, I think, the most successful. I think there's been lots of tries to, for example, make certificates for existing paintings and have that registry entered on a blockchain as well, so you can trade the painting by trading the certificate. That's something that has to be tried. I find that a bit of a weird kind of compromise from both sides. I don't think it fits so well right now. But then there's also versions where, like, for example, things that were digital works created by painters in the past, and this Andy Warhol example is quite a good one, where he made a digital painting on an Amiga in 1985, was then ported into being an NFT and traded as an NFT now, which I think is actually a really interesting use of that. It's saying, okay, this was an Andy Warhol that was produced that didn't really have a way to be cared for, inventorized, collected, like so much of his other work was designed to do. And here we have a new technical environment where you can do that. So I think there's maybe like a couple different ways which it's possible.
I think like if somebody finally has a clue what is meant to be thinking about the metaverse and it's fully developed, whatever it will be, the value of really unique physical objects will increase plentyfold.
Yeah.
And I can imagine connecting any like analog piece of art with an NFT and building a registry and a market that is more sustainable and joyful and has more stakeholders than until now.
Right, so collective ownership.
Right. Collective ownership, but also the royalty model. That everybody who ever owned an artwork will gain with every resale. I think that sounds just much better and much more sustainable than the current art market, because it would mean that the galleries who have been driving innovation, small and middle-sized galleries, could finally gain again from their own investments instead of being afraid of their own investments. The galleries.
Ich sage das mal auf Deutsch. Also ich wollte eigentlich nochmal sagen, ich würde sehr gerne das Buch empfehlen von Kolja, weswegen wir heute Abend hier sind. Denn ich habe bisher, also wir sind jetzt seit einem Jahr als Galerie, seit über einem Jahr an dem Thema dran, und ich habe keine bessere Einführung bisher und konsistentere und intelligentere gelesen als Kolja Reicherts kleines Buch über Krypto-Kunst. Deswegen würde ich das sehr empfehlen.